Hey guys, welcome to episode 4 of 905 Kung Fu. Talking about Kung Fu around the Golden Horseshoe. Can you hear me okay?
I can.
Okay, awesome. A little funny. So what we're going to talk about today a little bit, unless there's anything new and current we wanted to go over. Let's start with that. How's anything new in classes?
Still working, plugging along. Folks have gotten to about the halfway point with the Kung Fu Basics routine, the Jinu. And so that's about the point where we'll be stopping practice in terms of adding new movements. And now we're going to work on polishing the first half. Picking out what fighting applications exist for that form, as we may have mentioned before, is really much more about rooting, generating force, learning your left from your right, and so on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I guess I'm not sure if so Miss Gibbons brought it up this week. I don't know if she watched the last one or if she just heard me talking about it, but she heard about this. She says we're going over forms. She's like, "There's another Kung Fu Basics," and I was like, "Yeah, of course there is. There's the other, the other. We just talked about this," and she didn't know, and she was like, "Oh, can I learn that?" I'm like, "Yeah, I guess I'll teach it to you. No problem." It just, like I said, it's not like it's like a hidden gem or anything. It's a good form, but we just never got around to it because there's all this other stuff. And then I was looking at it because we talked last week about being more advanced, but not as flowery, but more advanced kind of application wise. And I looked at it again. I'm like, oh yeah, Sifu Dale was definitely right.
It's pretty dense.
Some of the stuff in it is not such a basic form, right? Nope. There's some pretty good movements in there. So I'll be looking at that again. If you guys are watching, please like and comment below so we know you're here. Put a comment in the box so we know that you're watching. Oh, I got to quiet myself here. So no, that's great. We're getting close to our testing cycle too. We're testing next week. So this coming week, we're starting our review, and then the following week, we're going to test. And then, as I mentioned, next cycle, we're going to do that double tiger hook seminar. We haven't picked a date yet, but we're hoping you can come down and join us for that.
I'll be there.
We'll probably do a little bit of a seminar with food too. So I don't know if we're going to do tacos and tiger hooks or Thai food and tiger hooks, but I want that alliteration to be there. So it's either got to be tacos or Thai food.
Tacos and tiger hooks.
Any other food that sounds good that you can start with a T, I'd put that in, but I haven't thought of anything else. If you guys are watching, let me know. Tacos, Thai food. What else? Toasted tomato sandwiches. That doesn't sound as appealing, but anything else with a T, we'll put that in. We'll combine it with some double tiger hook training.
Maybe teriyaki and tiger hooks.
Teriyaki and tiger hooks. Yeah, that could be good. Okay. We'll keep brainstorming that. But anyway, we'll pick a date for that, and then we'll confirm, let you know. And all of our Black Sash alumni are invited to that as well. So we're talking about the value of martial arts practice in modern times, in peace times, versus way back when. When we brought this up, what did you mean way back when?
So I was reading a text recently. It was written by. Let me not try to recall exactly who wrote it, because I've been reading a couple things lately, and I don't want to confuse the authors. But I was reading a text that was written by one of the masters around the time of the founding of Jinwu, and basically his foreword in the book was kind of making a case for the inclusion of martial arts in the public school curriculum for phys ed training. Reason being that he stated was due to impending war, and I think this was just prior to the Japanese invasion, if I remember correctly. And so basically, he was making the case that in the times that they were living in, it was necessary to make sure that the population had the means, not only the will, but the means and the strength to defend their nation. And that was very important to them at the time, because invasion was a very real possibility. And so that was the context behind the decision to found the this is my understanding, is that that was the context, behind why they founded not only various martial arts clubs, academies, but the martial arts were included into the public school curriculum at some point as well, right? So I thought that that was an interesting contrast to the times that we live in now. We live in very peaceful times comparatively. Comparatively, I'm saying. I know there's a lot of methods that we hear about all the time on social media and whatnot, but the question then becomes: is it that things have gotten worse, or is it that we have technology and the means to hear all of the news from everywhere at once, right? But that being said, here where we are today, we are relatively much safer and much more peaceful times than at that point in history, and so that was really where those thoughts and where those ideas came from. Their reasons for practicing martial arts then are quite different than our reasons for practicing martial arts now, as individuals, and even collectively. Right? So I figured that would be an interesting topic of conversation.
Yeah, and it's good, to plug kind of our own branch too. That's a big part of the Jinwoo Academy, how Jinwoo started. If you just got to watch a Bruce Lee or a Jet Li movie, based on Jinwoo, and it kind of illustrates, obviously dramatic, but that same thing, right? That they were getting, invaded by Japan in China, and Jinwoo had a lot to do with that. It was kind of a cultural collection of martial artists, so they would stand together more as a nation, instead of getting divided in all these different cliques of martial art. That was kind of what one of the points of the Jinwoo was, to get everyone together, and that's why you had Mantis and other styles training under the same roof, because it was more important that we all got into martial arts than it was to bicker about who's from what style. And I think that's a sign of a high quality martial artist too. Whenever I have a conversation with other school owners, the ones that are, they're focused on the right things, you can usually have a really good conversation with them about what's important. And the ones that I think have a little more growing up to do are usually bickering about what style is better at this and better at that and all that stuff. And it's like, you could merit there, but what's really important, right? What's important is the self-cultivation, that we're all on a similar path of strengthening ourselves. That saying keeps on getting, I don't know if you broke this up. Did you bring this up last week, or was it just, it's a phrase that keeps getting brought up regularly lately, is that weak times create strong men create good times create weak men.
I'm familiar with the adage. Yeah.
So it does get thrown around lately, but I think just as, martial arts are not more important during those times when you're threatened as a community or whatever nation or whatever. They're important all the time, because if you're not training during those peace times, and you're not self-cultivating, it's you're going to be making easy times, which are going to create weak people. And then weak people are going to create those hard times. So it's not something that goes in and out. It's something that's needed all the time.
Within the martial arts, I would say that it's one of those things where it's better to have it and not need it than to need it and not have it. Right? Yeah. Or said otherwise, it's better to be a warrior in a garden than a gardener
in a war. Showing up with your shovel.
Right. Right.
This
right.
This one book, I don't know if I could share on here while we're live, but this book here, I recommended this to you a while ago. I don't know if you ever got around to picking it up, but can you see it? This cover here?
Oh yes, I've got it.
Yeah. So that was a fantastic book. I really like that one, and it gave me some really good perspective on the history of martial arts, and it got me to think way back more, even beyond Shaolin was the beginning of Kung Fu, and that's arguable, right? But kind of even before that, based on the history, right? And he talks a lot in there about Confucius, which I really liked, because he talks about, and in my opinion, after reading the book, I would make the argument that Kung Fu started with Confucius, depending upon your definition. right? So when you said about this, like old times, that's why I asked, like, what do you mean old times? Because when did martial arts start? Like you could say that, okay, maybe it started at Shaolin. We know that's not likely, that, you know, the martial arts came from India before that. And I'm sure there's evidence even before that there was, but when you think about it, martial arts started when one dude took a tool that was up until that point used for hunting and used it to attack another person, right? And then tried to do it more proficiently than that person. That's really the beginning of martial art, right there, when it became an art and a science, when there was a method of, okay, I need to take this tool for hunting, use it against another person, and I need to do that more efficiently, right? That right there, in my opinion, is the dawning of martial art, in that, you know, in the physical sense, for self-defense, for survival. Okay.
Yes.
The other part to that is Confucius was teaching archery, and he was teaching the skill of archery not as a means for survival or war, but self-cultivation. So that's kind of the second phase right there is, you know, if you consider that martial art used for self-cultivation, well, then I would think it started with Confucius, because that was part of his teaching. If you're going to be, you know, a scholar and balance that art with being a warrior, well, then you need to use this art for self-cultivation, right? So he laid that out very well in the book.
Yeah, I think that the term art, that I think is a key word there. And when you speak about proficiency and striving for proficiency, towards proficiency, I think that's where the art is expressed, right? And it's through that, you know, that also tying into self-cultivation, right? Striving for proficiency or perfection or whatnot. That is the skill that is acquired through the effort and the sacrifice and so on, right? That I see the art side. And the martial aspect to it is the fact that we are dealing with violence at the end of the day, right? It is its own thing, regardless of what moral or ethical characteristics that we might want to attribute to it or whatnot. It is just a thing. It's a concept, and it's almost the seeking proficiency at it when you subtract the self-cultivation, right? And this is kind of where I think there comes room when you remove the art, when you remove the word art, where you get the opportunity to append, say, sport, for example, right? You have the martial, but the art is replaced, right? And then with that, you see the intent change, and with the change of intent, you see the form, and so on and so forth. And it looks like the same thing in a lot of cases, but it's not quite.
We know it's not, and that's the parrot. Like, I don't know if it's a little bit of a balancing act. I mean, the intent to make martial art more proficient by having it compete, like, as well intentioned as that is, always changes the art, makes it a sport, and when you're making it a sport, you're taking away a lot of the, you know, well, you're changing the intent when it's to either just, you know, whenever you compete, you introduce rules. It's not really the same thing, and you change the art just to get the points, right? So it's not the same expression as it once was. But then again, you can make the argument, well, if we're not going to compete, how do we test it for proficiency? But I mean, the bottom line is that you're using it for self-cultivation. It's not about, you know, having one person be, you know, you're not testing one person on their ability to beat up another person when it's for self-cultivation. And I was thinking about this because now, you know, when you talk about how martial arts now would be different than back then, now we use it for self-cultivation, and anyone can be taught. And a lot of times people have this opinion where, like, well, you know, why are you teaching it to, you know, a child of this size and give them that rank, because they're never going to be able to defend themselves against like a full-grown adult. You've heard that argument before, right? It's like,
exactly.
yeah, you're really missing the point. And I thought, well, this is something new. Now that we're doing this more almost as recreation, this is a new concept, but this is not new. This is something that even Confucius had to deal with. So I was reading this, that there's people who had commented at the time when he was teaching archery, right, which is a martial art. He was teaching it for self-cultivation. He would have criticism saying, well, why are you teaching it to these people that can't even pierce the leather? Meaning that when they would shoot archery, they can't pierce a leather target. And if you can't pierce a leather target, then you can't pierce, the flesh of an animal. So you can't use it for something of a practical sense. And we hear that same argument now. It's like, well, if you can't beat up this person, well, then it's not really, what's the point of it? Well, that's not the point. Exactly. The point is fulfilling your potential, right? Your potential might not be to defend yourself against whatever, someone that's like, either much larger in size or multiple opponents or whatever. Point is, are you fulfilling your potential, right? The best you can possibly be.
And even to keep that same idea within the context of self-defense, I mean, I tell my students that the point is to increase your confidence in your ability to defend yourself intelligently. Whether you're in some kind of altercation or something like that and you win or you lose, that's aside from the point, right? Just to keep speaking in the context of self-defense. What I would say that I would more care about is how were you able to apply yourself in the attempt to defend oneself, right? Was it this?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Did any of the spaghetti stick to the wall? Right.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There's cases where, not necessarily my students, but I've, been in class when other students would come in and say, oh, Sifu, this or that happened over the weekend. And all of a sudden I moved like this and that happened. And I didn't even know, but, I applied my Kung Fu. It wasn't a thought. It wasn't a decision. Your body just moved when it needed to. And it moved in some sort of intelligent way. Right. When I say intelligence, I don't mean scholarly intelligence in that sense, but what I mean is deliberate almost, right? And that is kind of like a result, desired result, right? You don't practice playing the piano so that you can never play a tune,
mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right? I mean, even if you're playing "Mary Had a Little Lamb," right? There's at least that context, right? So, and that's really just on that level of self-defense. When we get much farther beyond that when we talk about self-cultivation. It's the same thing. It's like I've had people ask, why do we practice with swords and such, swords and spears and such, when people have guns nowadays? And again, I say, if you even ask that question, you're missing the whole point, right?
Mm-hmm.
People will go to the gym, pick up heavy stuff, put it down again. That has nothing to do with self-defense. People don't ask them what the point of that is. People don't ask them what the point of the ridiculously large muscles are, right?
You're only ever going to lift 4 grocery bags at a time. Why are you lifting that?
What are you doing over here? Right? Nobody asks them that. Right?
Yeah.
Nobody asks. Right? And then now we see, like, people are now coming around to, I see stuff like iron mace training, people training with a Persian hammer and things like that. And these are basically military tools that somebody got the bright idea to turn it into a fitness tool,
mm-hmm.
because it's heavy. Okay, so what's the difference?
Yeah.
What's the difference, right? And people are getting rich off of these fads when, these are things that have been practiced for thousands of years, which with I dare say much more history, much more planning, much more. I mean, we stand on the shoulders of those that came before us. It's not like you or I invented what we do, right?
Mm-hmm.
there's so much more behind it. And it's a technology, really, at the end of the day. Kung Fu, or no, I mean martial arts in general, right? I mean, they may not be tangible, but it is something that through learning will increase your efficiency and proficiency. It makes you good at life. So it's true. I can't tell you anything that expertise in Kung Fu that skill won't bleed. It will bleed over into anywhere in life, because what you're learning is really mastery of, people say mastery of the self. What does that mean? I'll say more specifically, mastery over your own body. Mm-hmm. If not the mind, right? Mm-hmm. If not self, but mastery of your own body. Being able, I mean, you'd be surprised at how many people don't realize that their foot lands where it lands. Their foot doesn't land where they place it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right? It's two different things, right?
I always like this about Mantis too, and that was one of the hardest things that I remember. Sifu Ferrer yelled at me one time when I put up a video of me doing I don't know what it was, some form, and he was giving me crap about my toe kick recoil. How that he's like, yeah, the kick went out, but it took a nap after
just
that.
Dropped right.
Like, what do you mean, right? And I had noticed this, like, and this after he said that to me, I noticed it everywhere. Like a lot of times, even in the Shaolin arts, they do that kick and they leave it hanging after, or they just let it fall down. And I'm like, what? Now I see it. Like, why do they do that? And I still haven't found a good reason for doing that. Other than it's like, it's wushu and that's the look they're going for. But the practical need for not pulling that leg back as fast as you can, I don't get it. And my students on this, because I'm harping them all the time. Like, if that kick doesn't pull back just as fast, if not faster than it fired out, it's not a good kick. And for that reason, if you let it hang, then you're going wherever the will of, gravity or the person who blocks that leg, wherever they're going to put it, and you lose control. Right.
Exactly. And if you have the misfortune of being stuck with a particularly astute opponent, somebody can notice that your foot simply goes on vacation after you kick, and they can take advantage of that. A nice leg sprouting kick or a 7-star stance. And
yeah, definitely. Well, that's in Mantis. That's what you have to do. You punish everything. Anytime someone you are punishing everything your opponent does. We started doing stomping steps training last night. Last night? No, well, yesterday during the day. I was doing my staff training with my like 3 or 4 instructors, and we started doing. They've all done the 2-man set, but most of them have only done one side of the 2-man set.
Oh, okay.
So I said, okay, ready now, everyone, for the next 2 months, you guys are going to switch and you're going to the other side. And it was a lot of fun, but I was showing that, like, okay, look, you guys are getting caught up. Like, the handwork is awesome. All the stuff you're doing is great, but you're getting caught up at the handwork and you're not looking at the basic thing that's going on. Is the position, is you are a constant bully, not bully in the bullying, but I mean, like, within the movement. And every step you take has to be, charging into that person's space and getting their and moving them, like moving their position forward. And once you get them back, then you take up that ground that you've earned, right? That's good combat. There's no guessing. There's no like, oh, did I get that ground? No, you move in.
Exactly.
Very aggressive style. And sorry, go
it's
ahead.
Interesting that you use the term bully. I find that interesting because when you observe the praying mantis, the insect, so bully, I'll get back to that. Buddy Dave out in Curtis, we spoke about him previously. Okay, great. So he talks about the concept of being the sheepdog, right? We don't want to be sheep, nor do we want to be the wolf, but rather seek to be more like the sheepdog, right? Through our practice and the cultivation of our skill, we gain the ability to walk amongst the wolves, right? But we protect the sheep, right?
That's good. Yeah.
Pretty good, right? So stick with it. That being said, and you think about the praying mantis in the wild now. I mean, not that I've necessarily done the research that Master Wong Long did, but we've got YouTube, so we can look it up.
Great resource, yeah.
Great resource. Okay. So watching the praying mantis in the wild, and you see how it operates, you see it behaves. The style does bully in terms of its intent, its the strategy, the tactics that it employs. But the insect, both the insect and I realize as well some of the adages that we've been told from Master Chow, I think it to me it makes the whole sheepdog concept make a bit more sense. You see the praying mantis in the wild, it doesn't back down from anything. It does not back down, right? It doesn't necessarily attack first either. I don't know. I'm not going to speak and say never, but most of the videos that I see, it will sit there and it'll wait.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Wait. You going to make a move?
Mm-hmm.
Right? And it'll wait. The moment its prey makes a move, bam, on it. And that's where you see the bullying happen.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
That's where you see the bullying happen.
And that's the same. Yeah, that's the philosophy in Mantis Kung Fu is, instead is I'm not going to. Yeah, exactly. I'm not going to go and I'm not going to go and look for trouble.
Right.
But yeah, once you're crossing that reaction distance line where you're now in my space and you're threatening, well, now I've got to turn things around and I have to be in control of the situation, not responding to you, but now you're going to respond to me.
Respond to me.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And that's what the mantis does. And then it baits its prey into moving a certain way. So then it can tangle it up based on that movement that it was almost as if it was predicting what the thing was going to do. Right. And yeah, the mantis movements are the same way. I mean, you're throwing out a punch, assuming it's going to get blocked and then ready to move and control the limb from there. Yeah, it's really neat. I was so we were doing some sparring, not sparring, but like we were doing a game sparring. I was getting the black sashes to move, to learn how the body moves continuously in slow motion. So I don't know if you ever did this sparring drill. It's a lot of fun. It's the crash test dummy sparring drill, I call it, where I don't know if I ever did this when you came out one time, but basically all you do as the whatever, like the mantis person, is you're attacking in slow motion, and the person on the receiving end is just basically taking the strikes in slow motion, but you're trying to intuitively get the way the body would flow in a fun way, right? So I was doing this, and it was my turn, and I think I was going against Mr. Hansen, and he's great because he's just very, very relaxed, and he gets it intuitively how the body moves, so he flows with it. Yeah. Well, one of the young students was watching, and they were just like, because I was like, twisting and grabbing and breaking, and we were having fun. We were making all these like violent faces, and someone was like, "You're so violent." And I'm like, well, like they were surprised. Like, well, what do you think we do here? Like, we teach really good violence, right? And but we're very nice. We're very nice people, right? Like we do this intentionally. Like we have at our school, like and sure you're the same way. Like we call a no a-hole policy, right? We have a screening system where we do not want to let anyone in that would be ill-intentioned into the style. Once we've gone through that vetting process, we know that you're a nice person, then it's the same thing like you said, then we're going to teach the person how to be, the warrior in the garden. So having the ability to conduct yourself very violently and choosing to conduct yourself peacefully is, much more virtuous than just assuming that because someone isn't capable of violence that they're a good person, right?
I think it was Jordan Peterson had a quote about that when he said that
I can't remember the exact quote, but yeah, I've heard him say it before.
Can you hear me?
Yep. You got a little bit quiet, but I can still hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yep. Can you hear me? Am I out? Sounds like checkity check. If you guys are, oh, there you go. Okay, I got you now.
How's the audio?
I can hear you.
You can hear me now?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah. So I think it was Jordan Peterson, and he was basically saying that I'm just going to kind of paraphrase because I don't remember the quote word for word, but he was basically saying that there's only merit in being a peaceful person if you're capable of violence. If you're incapable of violence in the first place, you're not being peaceful. You're just,
you don't have a choice. It's not a choice in the matter. You're not. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. Without choice, without that choice, right? You have to be able to. I mean, and even yeah. I wish I could remember the exact quote because then I could speak to it. Maybe I'll look it up for the next time, and we'll talk about it more specifically on the next.
I mean, you've captured it, right? But yeah, there's you can't. I mean, it's a mistake to assume someone is peaceful by default because they don't have the other option. They may be, right? Yeah, right. But it's foolish to automatically assume that, right? Yeah. The point I had here was we kind of talked about. We want to talk about the mentality of when martial arts was developed, compared versus the mentality we practice today. And there is probably a difference, but again, I would think not as much as one would assume. As long as that what you're talking about, the intent is there in training, right? Like you are trying to be capable of violence while having the self-control not to be. I don't know. What do you think about that? Is that a newer concept relative to the martial arts and its origin?
I don't believe so. I don't believe so. Because the thing is that okay, so the desire to protect those who may not be able to protect themselves is not new. To be able to do that, one must be capable of violence. Okay? Mm-hmm. To defend against violence, it could be argued that you must be capable of violence. Mm-hmm. Right? Otherwise, you're just a victim. Right? Now, what I was saying earlier is that violence is it's a thing, it's a concept. It's people assign morality to the concept of violence.
Yeah.
Which doesn't make any sense, right? You judge the actions within the context, but violence itself, it doesn't make sense, right? Like that's like saying, eating makes people fat, so eating is bad. What?
Yeah.
What do you mean? You have to eat, right? So with violence, I would say that there is a time and place for everything. And we teach people how to discern and to be prepared, as we spoke about. In so many contexts in life, it does you no favors to have opportunity and not be prepared, right? Mm-hmm. In a positive sense. So in the inverse sense, it doesn't do you any good to have misfortune come along and be equally unprepared.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah, and the paradox is, and this maybe this sounds like a cliche maybe, but it does seem like the more you train, the less likely you are to engage in it. And I found this. I was witnessing a little bit of a, how should I say this? A conflict that got physical a couple weeks ago. And I was saying to the person that was it got de-escalated and everything, and I was saying to the person, someone I care about, I said, what were you thinking? What were you doing? Well, they had a reason they thought for doing it. I said, yeah, but like you don't understand how close you were to that person and how fast something could have went very, very wrong. Like people who are untrained don't understand the importance of distance, right? Like the difference that a couple inches of range can make. And you see this all the time when people say stupid stuff like, yeah, I'm not trained in martial arts, bro, but you don't know me. When I get fired up, it's on, you know, like stuff like crap like that. Like, you know,
and then they hit you with the Judy chop, right?
Yeah. No, but when you're this close to someone face to face, like I'm not putting my money on you that you're because you don't know what you're doing when you're that close. You know, you really have no idea. It's the stupidest place that you can be. You know, unless granted, unless you are in a contest and not a fight, right?
Well, contests have rules, right?
Even if they're not clearly written, even if they're assumed, right? They're still kind of different, right? So you're in a setting where, you know, there's maybe, you know, you're with the group of friends and the other guy's with the group of friends, and you kind of have that understanding that it's just you two. Like, okay, that's the contest. Someone could break the rules, and, you know, then there's like a, you know, well, that's not an honorable thing to do, right? If it's a contest, that's kind of different. But if it's not a contest, you know, you should be keeping your space at all times. That's the best way to avoid any kind of physical confrontation, is just keep that space, right? Because as soon as you're in that bubble, you can't react in time, or you react poorly, you know, when it comes time. I think I told you the story before when I did my adrenaline training with Peyton Quinn for that REMCAT the adrenaline training was awesome, and we'd spent so much time actually just on the concepts of a fight, the anatomy of it, right? And the first part not even being physical, the first part just being that what we would call that interview, right? When someone's kind of like, what you looking at? Like that interview is designed to get that reaction and to get you to, you know, get triggered. And that's how it starts. And as soon as I had kind of trained on that anatomy and understood it, a week after I got back from that training, I was downtown St. Catharines for some reason. I don't remember, but it was late. It was like 11 or 12 at night, right? And I was walking across the street. This is back when chili pepper used to be a thing. I don't know if you remember downtown St. Catharines at all, but that was a happening spot, right? I think now it's boarded up. But anyway, I was walking down there and I was looking, and I was actually interested in the real estate at the time. So I was late, but I was looking at the buildings, and one guy happened to be standing in one of the doorways as I was looking at the buildings and stuff. And he was like, "What you looking at?" And I was like, "Hey, that's an interview, right?" And like
that probably weirded him out, though.
Well, I didn't say it, but I was like, "Oh, cool!" Like I didn't, but in my mind, I was like, "This is an interview. I'm getting interviewed right now." But my mentality, because I was able to analyze it, changed. And I didn't have that trigger. Like, what? I could take that. You know, like that didn't go on because it was there. Just having that understanding of it, right? So, anyway, sorry, I think you're getting off topic a little bit. I can't remember my original thought. But yeah, I don't know where I was going with that.
We were saying that with skill, the likelihood of a confrontation goes down, right?
Exactly.
And that there, I think what you're talking about there is even just a concept of threat recognition, right? Recognizing, and maybe threat is a bit of a strong word, right? But that interview, that first, it's almost an assessment to see if you're eligible, right?
Yeah. Yes, exactly. That's it. Yeah, exactly.
And you basically have to be able to recognize it in order to decline. Well, you don't have to be able to. I mean, some people are very good at diffusing situations naturally. It's just their personality or whatnot. But again, this is that kind of thing is, you know, and me as a teacher, I don't like to give credit for things that are done unconsciously, right?
Yep.
I'll tell my students, hey, you know, great job. I mean, you did it. You didn't get hurt or whatnot. However, I'll take away marks because you didn't mean to do it. You didn't mean to do it, right? It was an accident. Yeah. So, you know, so some people are just naturally good at that, right? And deflecting and diffusing situations. But I agree with you 100% is that with more training, you know, it decreases the likelihood, even if it is, you know, from the angle of cooling the ego, right? So you're less likely to respond to interviews and woofing, right?
Yeah.
And really that's just one angle of it, but it's, you know, it's an easy example to understand, right? So
Yeah, definitely.
but I agree with you 100%.
So another thing we were going to talk about was the self. So this is another good point for, so past versus present self-defense, because, you know, we're talking about the values kind of the same, the mentality, you know, pretty close to the same. The self-defense, I would argue, has evolved to be more all-encompassing than it was previously, when martial art was thought of, you know, just for immediate self-preservation.
Yes.
Because one thing we talk a lot, especially in Mantis, because Mantis is a system, in my opinion, that is energetically sound, and having good alignment to structure the body for longevity. Longevity is a big part of Prime Mantis. So like Grandmaster Chow was, you know, training with us well into his mid to late 80s. And last time I talked to him, he said he's still practicing. He does Tai Chi every day, and he's still practicing a few forms every day too. He said he does Kung Fu basics, stomping steps. He runs to those forms. He's got to be, I was trying to get his age out of Sifu Ferreira the other day, and I calculated it before. I shouldn't say it on here. I think I've got it.
He's pushing 90. I don't know his actual age, but he's
close to 90, and he's still practicing. So the longevity is built in there. So what other aspects of self-defense that go beyond just the punching and kicking are involved in this?
Indeed. And I think that is a super broad question. I mean, for me, when it comes to self-defense, the physical is really just the first line, the first realm of self-defense, right? Self-defense applies in so many aspects, because there's so much going on in the world that happens to us, right? And the only thing that one can really control in the world is yourself. Mm-hmm. So there are things that we do that make us more efficient, more proficient at maintaining, I suppose, lifestyle, for lack of a better word, that we would like to have. So lifestyle applies in some ways, but I think lifestyle doesn't. I don't know if it's the best word in other ways. So here's what I mean. Do people buy life insurance? Could that not be seen as economic self-defense?
Yeah. And I mean, part of why we put a lot of emphasis on Black Sash as a goal, taking between 3 to 5 years, is because it stretches out the student's time perspective. And we know that, like, one common denominator between people who are genuinely successful in the way that they perceive success, whatever it is, one of the common denominators is time perspective. Whereas the longer they can see down the road and plan for it, the happier, healthier, wealthier they're going to be, right? In all ways. Someone has a very short time perspective. So if you think of it as a spectrum, when one end having a long time perspective and the other end having a very short time perspective, right? Someone with a very short time perspective would be someone like with like a substance abuse problem. Right. Like, they're not thinking 5 years in advance. Right. They're thinking like 5 hours. Exactly. That's it. On the other end of that, you have someone thinking long term. And in this case, like you're saying, life insurance, they're not thinking about just the end of their life. They're thinking, what's going to happen after my life? That's a long-term perspective. So you could, like, basically, that's a big part of Kung Fu, is that, you're right, stretching out that time perspective. And that ties in with what you're saying, life insurance. That's a type of self-preservation. I mean, you can preserve your own life, but then you also want to preserve the lives of others after you and the legacy that you're leaving behind as well. So that's a good point. Right.
To bring up Sensei Dave again, he's taught me plenty about survival in the wilderness, right? And I mean, that again is self-defense, right? If we want to talk about man versus nature,
Mm-hmm.
And there's so many useful concepts within that realm of survival information that can be directly applied to the martial arts and the management of one's self. I'll say, it's amazing. It's amazing. There's so much in there. One concept that was put across to me was that this is interesting. Knowledge. How can I say it? Knowledge is lighter than tools. Right?
That's a good, yeah.
That's really the most succinct way that I could put it. With knowledge, you don't need to carry as much.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
For example, if you know how to find or filter water, or
you don't
need to carry a water filter, right? All you really need to do is learn to find the things that you need, and then you use the knowledge to put it together, and you can survive. You can prolong your life.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I mean, we could look at how even a statement like that comes back to the martial arts. I suppose one thing that comes to mind is how similar. Maybe this is me thinking a bit too practically, but I think about how the weapons patterns, the weapons methods, how they translate to empty hand.
Mm-hmm.
You basically just remove the object and the actions don't change much. If
Mm-hmm.
the actions change, the footwork doesn't change much. Right? So with the knowledge, you require the tool less, right? I mean, how many times do we see, I mean, I guess in movies and stuff, although I've heard about it happening in real life a couple times, I've seen similar, but the moment some altercation begins, somebody reaches for a bottle, boom, and they smack the bottle, right? Reach for a tool right away,
Mm-hmm.
right? With knowledge, I mean, someone might say, use your belt, right? You've got a shirt on or a coat or a jacket or whatnot,
mm-hmm.
right? You don't need a shield.
Yeah.
Right? Taking it back then to what you were talking about earlier with your experience in out in St. Catharines there. Armed with knowledge, you knew how to manage that situation,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, we're not talking about necessarily how the knowledge maybe absolved you of the need for a tool, but maybe it did. Maybe that night you might have needed a weapon or to pick up a rock or something to defend yourself against somebody. But with knowledge, you solved the situation before it became a situation, right?
Yeah, exactly.
But anyway, all of this to say that there are so many different areas of our life where the concept that's come into play is self-defense, but we don't recognize it as such. Many people don't recognize it as such because they don't study a system of self-defense.
Mm-hmm.
And lacking that perspective, how do I say this? Perspective will influence your choices, right? So just from coming from that perspective of self-defense, or like you were saying, with how having a longer timeline and outlook will impact your choices today, right? Having some knowledge of defense of the self will impact your choices, how you behave, the things that you find value in. Maybe you might go buy life insurance. No, I don't sell. I'm not an agent. But I think you're following. I think you're grasping what I'm trying to say here. Right?
Yeah. I think the one last thing I wanted to mention too, because Grandmaster Chow used to tell me this. He would say, he was teaching me 4-directional fighting, right? Was it I think it was 4-directional fighting. He said, Raul, practice this every day. You'll never get sick. And I have gotten sick because I didn't practice it every day. Try to practice it a lot, but not every day. But his point was that too. Also, if you're doing this stuff and your body's moving, your circulation's good, you're gonna fight off illness a lot better than a person who isn't training. So that's also that's also a big part of the self-defense as well. Against that kind of illness. So good.
Agreed.
Good. Well, I think we covered a lot of ground. That was great. So we'll leave it at that. And yeah, like I said, I'll hammer down that date for that. What did we say it was called? Tiger hooks and teriyaki. We'll go with that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Tiger
I'll let you know that date
teriyaki.
when we make that date solid. And yeah, thanks again for joining me. And we'll talk again in a couple weeks, right?
Indeed.
Okay.
Thank you.
Have a good night. Thank you.
All right.